I got to address this Osama Bin Laden letter, which I just think is kind of comical. This is a mass murderer, obviously, who wrote a letter to why Islamism, his faith, which murders homosexuals and oppresses women, is the true faith and has to take over the world, and why anyone who doesn't accept it must have it crammed down his throats, and we must kill all the Jews. And people are watching this on TikTok, young people, because the Chinese are trying to destroy us, so they run TikTok and they're putting this stuff out there. And suddenly they're like, oh, wow, this is just like what I learned in college about decolonization. Here's just an example.
It's wild, and everyone should read it. If you haven't read it yet, read it. However, be forewarned that this has left me very disillusioned, and I feel the same exact way I felt when I was deconstructing Christianity. I feel just confused, like I have entered into another timeline. What is this? And yeah, so go read it.
This is like getting a letter from Jeffrey Dahmer and people going, wow, torturing and eating homosexuals. I never thought of that before. It's kind of just like in my English class. I mean, these are some of the things he says. He accuses the United States of bringing the people AIDS, a satanic American invention, because we tolerate homosexuals. The Jews control your policies, media, and economy. There's an original thought. You have used your force to destroy mankind more than any other nation in history. And here, I know I've said this before, but let me remind you, every free man, and there are no free men under guys like Osama Bin Laden, every free man, every free woman, anyone who can speak their mind, anyone who can live their life, anyone who can make their choices, anyone who is in that position is there because an American soldier got shot at to do it, because Americans spent money to preserve it, because we protect it. Every single one. Do we have our flaws? Do we have our... Yeah, we're human beings. It's a child's way of looking at the world. This entire thing about decolonization is a child's way of looking at the world. This is how good ideas spread. I know it's ugly. I know it's not the way we would have them spread. We'd have them just wafted from place to place, but they don't. And this is what happens. People with greater power, with better ideas shows up and they take over countries. And yes, we'd like it to be done in a better way, and hopefully it will be one day. But disassembling is ridiculous. However, the thing I want to point out about this is, like everything the left says, every stupid idea they come up with is a good idea that the West had, that they have fumbled because they have forgotten what a man and a woman is. They've forgotten what human beings are. And so they're applying these ideas without God, and they just don't work anymore. Uniquely, the West has always given dignity to its enemies. After the Trojan War, right? This is the central mythic war of the ancient Greeks, right? This is the war that's in the Iliad. There's a play by Euripides at the peak of Athenian culture called The Trojan Women, in which he looks at the tragedy of being a woman conquered by Troy. This play won the second prize at one of the play festivals, which was a big, big deal, and it depicts the grief of the Trojan queen Hecuba and others at the killing of her children by the Greeks, by the people in the audience. This is something we uniquely do, is look at the world through other people's eyes. In this many, many stories and poems about the Crusades, Saladin was greatly admired. There are stories in ancient literature and medieval literature of Richard the Lionheart going to meet Saladin and them saying to him, don't go meet him because he's a Muslim. You can't trust him. He says, no, he's a Muslim, but he's a knight and he's going to do the right thing, and we can trust him, even though he hasn't found the right God yet. This has traveled on to us in Western movies, right? People are always saying this, the Westerns, they made the Indians the bad guys. But that's only a half truth. In penny Westerns, in the stupid Westerns, there were bad guy Indians, but are a lot of Westerns, and all the important Westerns that look at things from the Indians' point of view. I mean, I'll just give you an example. There's Broken Arrow with Jimmy Stewart. He's an Indian scout who has a heart for the Apaches, and he's listening. I think this is Will Geer, whose wife has been murdered by the Apaches, and they have this argument.
Maybe Captain Jeffords became too friendly with the Apaches. Maybe he doesn't know what side he's on.
Easy, gents.
I'm not looking for trouble, but if you don't fight against them, you're with them. And I've got a right to say that.
Who says so? What's your name?
Ben Slade. I own a ranch only a mile out from Fort Grant. Even so, the Apaches burned my house last month. My wife was inside. They almost got my boy, too. Seems to me a white man like you would want to see that sort of thing stopped.
That's right, anybody would.
And why don't you join the colonel's staff?
That's private business, Slade.
War ain't private business. Not when they're murdering our women and kids.
At Big Creek, we murdered Indian women and kids.
Cochise started this, and
Now, just let's get the facts straight here. Cochise didn't start this war. A snooty little lieutenant fresh out of the East started. He flew a flag of truce, which Cochise honored, and then he hanged Cochise's brother and 5 others under the flag.
Oh, you hear all sorts of stories.
There are a lot of Westerns like this. There's, Hondo is like this, where they pay respect to the people, even though they essentially were going to take over this country. Rudyard Kipling, was talking about the Mahdi, who was a Muslim leader who led a revolt. And the Fuzzy Wuzzies were the name, what they called. They had funny hair. The British called them the Fuzzy Wuzzies. And he wrote a famous poem. He said, "We fought with many men across the seas, and some of them was brave and some was not. The Pathan and the Zulu and Burmese, but the Fuzzy was the finest of the lot. Here's to you, Fuzzy Wuzzy, at your home in the Sudan. You're a poor benighted heathen, but a first-class fighting man." And, you remember Patton in the movie where he beats Rommel in the battle, and he says, "You magnificent bastard, I read your book." Clint Eastwood's Letters from Iwo Jima, in which we see Americans committing war crimes, and we see the Battle of Iwo Jima, the famous battle where they had the raising of the flag. We see it from the Japanese points of view. If any of these films put forward the idea, though, that it was better to fight for the tyranny of Imperial Japan instead of for the freedom of America, if anyone put forward the idea that it was better to let the American continent languish in savagery and primitivism instead of becoming what it has become, the center of the free world, that would be ridiculous. Man is a broken animal. We know this. We know this because we know we're supposed to be something we're not. We know we're supposed to be better than we are. And war is a horror, and people do horrible things to each other, especially when they're out there on the plain, on the frontier, and they're afraid, and they're killing each other, and people come and rape your, family, and you fight back, and you savage them, and those are things that happen, and they're terrible. I get it. But some of us are fighting for something that's worthwhile. You have a right to life. You have a right to freedom. There are things that are worse than war. Slavery is worse than war. Degradation is worse than war. Having people who oppress your women and won't let them breathe or live or make choices, that's worse than war. These are things that we do that advance mankind. And do I wish that we knew how to advance mankind in a better, more peaceful way? Of course I do. Of course I do. But these are the things that happen in the world. And when these things explode, you've got to be on the side of freedom. You've got to be on the side of what's right. You've got to be on the side of pluralism. You've got to be on the side of treating people with dignity. We are the best there is. And is that a sad statement? Yeah, in many ways it is. It is a sad statement. But as I said before, every single person who is free because of us. And it's not TikTok's fault. This is the thing that I hate. The call is coming from inside the house. These kids have been taught what they were taught. Before we start worrying so much about social media, we start worrying about the minds of our kids. If you want great content like that, like and subscribe. And if you want even more great content, subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.